That's you.
Steve, come on back. Come on up. You hiding?
Just admiring all of.
All right, well, you want to be in position. So before we start, I'd like our honored guest and speaker to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Lorenzo?
If you could please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we have a great presentation lined up for you today. We're really honored to have Lorenzo speak with us. I had a tour of duty in Afghanistan. He's a retired U.S. Army major, as many of you know. He served in the military for a total of 21 years on active duty in the Army Reserves and in the Army National Guard. While he was in Afghanistan, he served as the Provost Marshal to the 3-star General Command at the base where he was stationed. So no small position. While he was there, he noticed that the Afghan people could make just about anything, and that's when the economic development light bulb went on. And so without further ado, Lorenzo, come on up. Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
That was my job. I'll sit at the wheel.
Okay.
I got that.
Should I go too far down? No problem. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us and me this evening, or this afternoon. So, one of the things while I was in Afghanistan that we noticed was that there was a lot of need for widows and their children. We would drive and see these children on the side of the roads. So one of the things that we started to explore was different ways to help them earn a living. So one of the things that we did was look for different economic opportunities. So that's what we went into. So while I was deployed to Afghanistan, I had my 2 primary positions where I was the Provost Marshal for the command, which is basically, it's the military version of the Chief of Police. So by saying that, I was responsible for all the law enforcement, all the way from everything from drunk drivers all the way down to, parking problems, and everything from missing secret computers to, soldiers arguing over nonsense. So I was responsible for all of that within the base. Also, though, because of my duties as the Force Protection Officer, I was responsible for everything leading to security of the enemy trying to get into my base. So that would have been anything structurally wise, like our big defensive HESCOs. They were like big sandbags, walls that were made out of concrete, flashing that would, if a rocket was fired at them, would cause the rocket to explode before it actually impacted, and things like that. So it also, as the Force Protection Officer, I was responsible to coordinate with all the different bases that we had around us, and also support them when they were being attacked in whatever ways, and so that way they would support us when we were being attacked. While I was out there, we were working with no less than 19 different countries. In my shop, I had at any time 3 other nations besides Americans working in my shop. So it was truly an international operation. This is a map of Kabul, and this Camp Eggers is what it became called Camp Eggers after I left. It was named after, I believe it was an Air Force Special Operations officer who was killed in Kunduz province? Kunar. So our base was renamed after him in honor of his dedication to service. But before I left, it was called Kabul Compound. I'm still used to calling it Kabul Compound, so if I refer to it as Kabul Compound, it is actually Camp Eggers. Well, it's no longer there now either, but it was Camp Eggers for a while afterwards. So when I first got there, our base was just about this here and here. So while we were there, we were responsible for doubling the size of the base, which was this part here and this part here. We were able to do that by, we would contract from Afghans. This was the middle of downtown Kabul. So imagine you're in the middle of downtown Chicago, and you got the army that says, by the way, we need your house. And you can give it to us, or you can give it to us. But they were happy, because we would pay them rent. And we would pay them rent, and they would move somewhere really nice, like Germany or Switzerland, okay, because they would get that government check every month, and it was prime real estate that we were after. I mean, it was downtown. Of course, the problem with that was also that it made it real difficult to, these were all main roads, made it real difficult to protect your base. Okay, so we had to get creative in different ways. Around us, we had a German embassy here. The school here was one of the prominent high schools in Kabul, Afghanistan, which was funded and supported by the Germans. The Afghans traditionally have a very close tie with Germany. I never really got into figuring out exactly why, but the dislike that they have for the Soviets, and they still call them Soviets, is the same amount of love that they have for the Germans. They completely do not like the Soviets. So back here was the presidential palace, which I was invited to a couple of times, but never actually got to meet. It wasn't the president, it was called the presidential palace, but it was also the palace for the king until he passed away about a year after I left. Never got to meet the king because he was but I did want to meet him because he spent 20-some years in Italy and actually was fluent in Italian, so it would have been kind of neat. This here was Masood Circle. I'll give you that name because remember, you're going to hear more about Masood. This here was the Italian, where is it? The Italian embassy right here, which is where I would go to church every Sunday, and then I would go eat there as often as I could. Whenever I could get off base, all I had to do was one straight shot there, and you know, I'd always take a couple soldiers with me. I always tried to do that to get some soldiers off the base from time to time. I was able to do I spent a lot of time off the base. Most of my soldiers never did. Most of them just watched from a tower for 12 hours, etc. So whenever I could, I would try and get them off the base with me. Obviously up here is a bunch of other embassies. We got the American embassy here. I spent a lot of time there. ISAF headquarters here. So it was an international community right in the downtown area of Kabul. So this was my headquarters. It was called the schoolhouse. All the buildings had names. And literally the schoolhouse was the name of it that the Afghans had for it. So we just kept the names that the Afghans had for it. So that was the schoolhouse. And here, my room was here, and yeah, all the way here. And I would usually have my morning coffee here while I would watch the gate guards bring in, and this is where I'm getting to, right? It's like, what is this guy talking about? I thought we're supposed to be talking about dolls. We'll get to that. But you also need to figure out that's tied into me, right? So one of the things that, because I was a force protection officer, my responsibility was to make sure that anybody that worked on my base who was a local national, that's what we called Afghans, and that was the respectful thing to call Afghans. Other guys had other names for them. We called them local nationals. That was, I would have to, what's called vetting. I'm sure everybody knows what that means. Basically make sure that we know who we're letting onto our base and that they're not a threat. So I would be responsible to do all the vetting and all. But I was also responsible, remember, on the provost marshal's side, to also make sure that my gate guards were doing the proper systematic, every day, day after day, the same kind of inspections. You see where I'm going with that. If you're not watching that, guys start slacking off. And girls, I had guys and gals working for me. So I could sit up there on the balcony while I had my coffee, and I would watch the operations at the main gate, which is where the Afghan locals would come in from. We had, as far as Afghan locals, we had groundskeepers, we had maids, you know, not really maids, but you know, they made sure that our laundry was done, because we didn't have laundry mats even when we first got there, right? I mean, we were responsible to take care of our own room, so it wasn't like that kind of maids. It was basically the common areas and laundry. And then we also had groundskeepers, and they loved their plants in Afghanistan. Wherever they could grow them, they grew them. So we had groundskeepers, we had interpreters. At any given time, I had on payroll about 320 interpreters for the whole base. I was responsible to know who all of them were, because I also, my section also created all their ID cards. So the interpreters and the security were really my favorite people, right? So the security here helped me. These guys actually worked within the base. I had 2 layers of security on my base that were Afghan. One was within the base they were like vetted at a higher level, so that way I felt I could trust them more to move other individuals around, because I didn't have enough Americans, so I had to use Afghans. And then also, I had a secondary Afghan group right outside my walls. They were armed. They were allowed to be armed outside my walls. They were not allowed to be armed inside my walls. That's changed, and that's why you hear a lot of bad things happening, is because now they changed that rule a little bit. So in this picture here, I actually am presenting their completion certificates. They were very big on certificates. They were very big on Americans providing them with certificates. My interpreters here, they would go out on patrols with my soldiers. And when I first got there, they weren't giving them helmets, they weren't giving them vests. To me, that was just cruel. So I had them all order vests for them. I had all of them ordered helmets. And what I'm giving them here is the name tags that I had made for them. And to them, that was like the equivalent of, you know, to me getting my doctorate. Okay, I mean, for them it was just such a life achievement because they belonged to somebody, and they belonged to an American organization. Okay, and that's why they got the U.S. flag and the Afghan flag. And then, of course, they were very big on pictures, so they also wanted me to take a picture with them, and eventually I signed the picture saying thank you for your valuable service, etc., and so on. Laminated them and gave them their pictures, but I took a picture of them before. So these were great. My interpreters were very good people. We had, in that picture up there, we have Murwais, we have Nasir, and we have Shafi. Okay. And now, the reason I tell you about these guys is because they were how I knew what was going on what was really going on in Afghanistan as far as at the local level. You know, the people, we were in the middle of downtown Kabul. I had to know what was going on in downtown Kabul. So, Monan, this is where I started realizing what great artisans these people truly were, okay? They say that you know, necessity is the mother of all invention. Well, Afghans got that down. So, the picture down here, that is the national sport, because obviously you're in a foreign land, you kind of, you know, I've always been a historian also. So I would ask them questions, and they appreciated me wanting to know about their culture, etc. So they always gave me lots of gifts. Now the way gifts work, I was able to accept gifts as long as they were under a certain amount, and as long as they didn't cost them, quote unquote, any money. So they would make a lot of things to give me, as opposed to buying stuff to give me. So this is the national game, it's Buskashi, and that picture is actually back there. And basically the national game it's a very violent game. And the name literally means goat pulling. And that's because that's what they use as their football, okay? And it's always on horseback. As you can see in the picture there, it's always on horseback. And they literally got to throw this thing from one goal to the other goal. And these games, I'm not sure how they keep score. I guess, you know, how many times you get them in each other's goal. But somehow they could go from a matter of hours to a matter of days. Because it also became like a game of endurance. And so that leads to basically the kind of people that Afghans really are. They are very, very enduring individuals, obviously, right? Very, very strong. Now, what is remarkable is that during the days of the Taliban, they actually outlawed this game. Now, you talk about a bunch of individuals that were very cruel to each other. They didn't like the game of Bashkushti. They never explained why, but they never. The other thing that kind of happened with that is, so the game is so violent, and you're trying to pull your buddy off his horse, and you know, he's trying to push you off of yours, and you got these whips that you're supposed to only use on your horse and the other guy's horse, but sometimes you use them on the other guy. So, yeah, I mean, very violent crime. Not crime, because it wasn't a crime. We were playing a game. So, I'm sorry, that was my military police part that just kicked in. So, it was just one of those games, that it was a passion for the Afghans because they did consider it so much a part of their lives. And then the other picture, he saw, Manan saw this picture on my, because I always had a picture of my bride by me, so he saw a picture of her, and he said to me, he goes, "Can I borrow that?" And I'm thinking, but then I'm thinking, well, that's all right, because I know where you live, I know where your mother lives, and there's your dad, and I know where everybody lives. I was like, yeah, sure. Well, a couple days, it took them a couple of days to do that. And that's not drawing. That is literally a hot poker, you know, the old hot poker in the eye? Well, that's literally a hot poker, and it's burnt onto the wood. And that picture's right there. So that's what he wanted to borrow it for. I was glad to know. You know, I'm sorry, the Afghan names, there were so many. Amir. This was Amir. He was, for my internal security, he was the supervisor for my internal security. And once again, they could not stop showing me their appreciation. So what he did was, he brought me this picture here that he says he didn't buy, although it was already framed, the back was done. However, he said that he did it for me because it reminds him of the old Afghanistan looking in on the new Afghanistan in the hope that the Americans brought them. Okay, so I mean, see, these are stories you don't normally hear, you know, about Afghanistan and what's all going on up there. They did appreciate us being there. At least, you know, from what they all told me, they appreciated it. All right, the bazaars. The bazaars was not like something that, you know, I think we'll start a bazaar. Bazaars have been going on for thousands of years in Afghanistan, and in most of the world actually, in different forms. But what we did do was that initially, the reason I put the Afghan money up there is because initially we would pay them in American money. But that wasn't helping the local economy because it was American money. So we had to stop paying them in American money and start paying them in, the Afghan money is called Afghani. An Afghan person is an Afghan. Afghan money is called Afghani. So I know, but anyway, that's what it's called. So we had to start paying them with those, and literally, whereas I used to just give them a couple of 20s, I used to end up having to give them like small boxes full of cash and pay them for the stuff that they would bring in, etc. So they could bring in all kinds of stuff. What I wanted them to bring in though was more relative to stuff from where we were, because they could give me cell phones, they could get me coffee pots, they could get me car tires. Anything I wanted, they could get. But I wanted stuff from Afghanistan. That's all the stuff you see sitting around. Is all stuff that I sent to the kids. So in talking to my interpreters and talking to some of the merchants, we started thinking of different things that we would have wanted to see them bring in. Okay? So our bazaars used to happen on Fridays. Fridays was considered, and I believe it still is in the Middle East, Friday is their holy day. So like our Sunday is Christian Sunday, is Afghan version is the Friday. And it was also in theory the day when nobody would attack your base. So initially when I first got there, they were allowed to like drive in and pick ups, and I quickly realized that was kind of a nightmare scenario. So what we started doing was I initially had my armed Afghan security inspect the vehicles outside, and then they were able to unload their vehicles outside and bring them in on carts, all their items. And that seemed to work really good, but then once they were getting ready to come in, my American soldiers would also inspect the carts before they brought them in. And that's how we never, knock on wood, we never had one horrible thing happen on my base, and we had bazaars every Friday, except for the Fridays when we got rocketed by the locals, and the days when we did get rocketed, we wouldn't have bazaars. The local warlord, we'll get to the warlord thing in a minute, he would make sure that whoever rocketed us would not do it again, and then I would start the bazaars again the following Friday. See, that's how, and the reason that he would do that is not because he loved us, well, I'm sure he did love us, okay? But the reason he really did that was because he got a cut out of everything that these vendors sold. Okay? So, as they're coming out, there's my security guys that, okay, you guys are done, but then the warlords guys are out there shaking them down. And that was, I mean, that's the way they did things in Afghanistan. I mean, it wasn't like a horrible thing. That's, oh yeah, we got to pay the warlord after the bazaar. You know, which, hey, that's, Afghan law is Afghan law. We didn't get involved with that. So, in doing all that, and doing the bazaars, I mean, we were able to get all kinds of stuff. DVDs that I would send home, and sometimes they were great DVDs, sometimes they didn't work very good at all. Sometimes you have people standing up in the middle of them, etc. and so on. Or jewelry, scars, as you see there's some scars, hats, weapons. Now, the Brits, they tried to invade Afghanistan in the 1800s. Most of those rifles you see there are British weapons, and so we were able to buy those and send them home. If they would have been modern weaponry, we could not buy them and send them home. But because they were antiques, we could. And the other responsibility that my MPs had was to make sure that anything these vendors were selling to my soldiers could buy. Because at one point they were trying to sell them bongs. Well, that's great, but you can't have bongs on my base, so we make sure that they put them back on their truck. Okay. So once again, in working with them, we developed a market that was really a good market, and one thing we still lacked were kids' toys. Right? So except for the carvings, they love to carve. I got more carved rocks, ivory. No, not ivory. It looks like ivory, but it's not. Wood, just all. They would carve everything, metal. Okay, but there was only so many carvings you could send your kids. So I started talking to a couple of my vendors and my security guys and my interpreters, and so they came up with some ideas. I also talked to this young man. This young man here was the best. He could get you anything. But when I said, what about kids' toys? He looked at me like I was speaking English. He had no clue what I was talking about as far. He's like, oh yeah, we got carvings. I was like, no. He goes, oh, we got decorated horses. I'm like, no, what about toys? I'm like, dolls, trucks. He goes, oh, toys. I was like, yeah. So his name was Donald Trump, because he could get us anything. He was the best. I mean, that's literally what his name was on my photo that I saved that says Donald Trump. He was the most outstanding entrepreneur in Afghanistan. He's probably a millionaire this day. Okay, at least that's my hope for him. And once again, then here's 50 Afghani, and here's carvings. Like I said, there's plenty of. By the way, there's a little security in the background. Nobody was supposed to see that. But here's here's carvings and stuff.
How old is he?
Which one? Donald Trump?
Yeah.
15.
Wow.
But at 15, he was basically. I mean, he'd been living on his own 2 years already. Yeah, they grew up fast, especially when they had to support. He was probably the only boy. He was the only boy in the family, and he was supporting his mom and sisters. There's my two. There's Gina. Gina was almost 6 years old. These pictures are obviously the 4th of July. Okay, so no, actually the date on them was 11 July, so it was right after the 4th. So Gina is almost 6 there, and she's right here today. And Anthony, Tony, had just turned 4 because his birthday is on the 9th. So they were who I was trying to send all the stuff home for. So after talking to interpreters and stuff, they finally started bringing me some jingle trucks. Now, jingle trucks. Why are they called jingle trucks? It's except for the Army guys and the Air Force, except for the military guys, who can tell me why they're called jingle trucks?
The bells in the front.
Bells, and they also, to make even more jingle, they would just put all kinds of random chains at the bottom. So when they would drive, it would make all kinds of jingling. So they were called jingle trucks. All right, and this was not from the best that I was able. Paula and I were talking about this. They weren't native to Afghanistan initially. They actually started seeing them in Afghanistan when we got there and we're trying to supply our troops, we're trying to supply our non-governmental agencies, because we had to be. It's a very, if you could see, look at the map here. We are right in the middle of the Hindu Kush and the Himalayas. Okay, and that goes all the way here. When I talk about the Central Highlands soon, this is the Central Highlands. Okay, so I mean it's all mountainous. So everything's got to come in from Pakistan or be flown in. So these guys would be on the road. They were Pakistanis. They would be on the road a long time trying to get the stuff to us. So they would decorate the trucks with heroic scenes of their village back home, verses of the Quran, or there were some that were Hindu. all kinds of stuff to keep them moving, you know. The fronts would be decorated in carved wood, and then you know, once again, there would all their doors. They would make them personalized as best as they could, and they actually would do, as not a surprise, I'm sure, but they would actually do competitions of who had the best looking truck. Also, very proud of their truck. So this was me in front of a jingle truck, and they created one that looked as close to that picture as they could get it. So I thought that was kind of neat. Now for Gina, this is where the Kabul Dolls comes in, okay? So one day, one of my interpreters came to me and he's like, you know, we've got a lot of widows with children that, you know, the government can't support them. Obviously when we got there, the government was practically non-existent. So she pitched the idea to my staff and I that they would create dolls from the different tribes of Afghanistan and their individual customary outfits. So this was Rita, and she was the founder of Kabul Dolls, and the idea was by us being able to help the widows and their children, we would be keeping our wives and children close at heart by sending them the dolls that they were making, right? So we were all helping each other. We gave her a small grant, and by grant I mean we never expected to see the money again. But we did all the paperwork and everything, and we were able to give her a small grant, and eventually they were able to start with the Kabul Dolls. Here's some pictures. Now they are Getty images. I have to put that out there. I did, so I do have to, you know, say that I did copy them off of Getty images. However, as you see, these are several of the workers starting to make these dolls. This was like when they very first started. It was right about, I want to say, might have been about September, October of 2004. And of course at the time, you know, the mentality was also changing in Afghanistan. They really didn't have to, the women could go to work, somewhat, right? I mean, but it's like, well, because the mentality had always been, well, you know, your husband's dead, you got 6 kids, oh well, you know, I guess you're poor. You know, you could still not go to work. So the mentality was changing, the Taliban was on the run, so we were able to start doing this without having to worry too much about the ladies' safety and stuff. Now it was not on my base, it was in Kabul, but it wasn't far from my base, so that we could respond if we needed to. And once again, they were very proud that they were able to start supporting themselves. You know, most of the pictures you're going to see with the ladies in it, they're happy. Okay, they're glad that they're able to do this and that they're letting them do that. Another thing that it did too was it was interesting that by doing this, a lot of our soldiers also learned a lot about the different Afghan tribes and the different customs. And it was something that when we were getting ready to deploy, you know, we tried to learn, you know, but we had so many other things to learn, and we couldn't remember anything about whether you're a Pashtun or Dari or, you know, what you were. So, but when we were there and we would get these dolls, we would also get a little card, and on the card, you may have seen some of them laying around. It'll say, like, your doll could be called, they were very polite, not, you know, your Barbie is named Jean, you know, and no, your doll could be called, and then they give you the name, they would tell you what it meant in English, they would tell you where they were from. So very, very interesting, and by doing that, we also got to learn about their culture and stuff. Once again, more pictures of the dolls and the ladies working. Now, why were there so many war widows, right? I mean, obviously, we were only there, at this point, we had only been there about 2.5 years. Well, since the 70s, Afghanistan had been in a constant state of warfare. So when the king was in Rome, King Zaire Shah. When he was in Rome getting some treatment for whatever he had, his best friends overthrew the government. But what happened was when they overthrew the government, they caused an entire civil war, because the only thing that was keeping, once again, remember I said there's all these different tribes all over Afghanistan. They're separated by mountains, they're separated by valleys, they don't really see each other much, so they don't trust each other. But they all trusted the king, because his bloodline went back as far as any of them could remember or cared to remember. He was the king and he was the king, so they all believed in him. The minute they overthrew the king, a ton of warlords broke out. So if you could raise an army, you could have your own part of Afghanistan. That was the price. It was the size of the army you could raise. And so for years, and how would you raise your army? Well, you would tell somebody, come on, I need you to come fight, or I'm going to fire you. And firing them would mean that they wouldn't be able to eat anymore, because they were all farmers. So that's why they had so many war widows. In the 80s, the Soviets invaded, and the reason the Afghans seriously disliked the Soviets, and that's probably the nicest way I could put it, was because they did horrible things to the Afghans. They did horrible things to their prisoners. You know, we talk about, oh, you know, waterboarding. Waterboarding never killed anybody. But the stuff that the Soviets did killed lots of people. One of the tribes we'll get into, the genocide was like an everyday thing as far as the Soviets were concerned. And then, of course, in the 90s, we had the old Taliban with the Sharia law, which just, you know, tightened the noose on everybody, and really a lot of the warlords who, for a little while, when they had actually defeated the Soviets and the Soviets decided to leave, the warlords were actually starting to come together and try and bring the king back, and then that's when the Taliban walked in. So they actually came up from Pakistan and down through Iran. They weren't really native to Afghanistan, per se. So it was, after all these wars, you had all these widows, and it was okay for them to actually start getting jobs to be able to pay for, you know, their children and stuff. But the big thing at this point was disarmament and reintegration, and that's one of the dolls, and we'll talk about them, is disarming all of the militias and reintegrating them into a common Afghan army. One army for all of Afghanistan, that was the motto. Okay, so besides being a source of money for them, it was also for the Afghan widows, and it was a source for them for friendship. It was a refuge for them. You know, you were with women that had the same problems as you. You know, why is my kid being a little jerk? Why is this? What am I supposed to do with this one? You know how that all is, right? But they were able to set a little. It was like a little commune that they were able to set up, and that was a great thing at the time because it was being supported by the government. Okay, Hazara. So this is one of the tribes of Afghanistan. Obviously, we'll jump right in. And the Hazari people are from just around the Hindu Kush, and then just north and south. So right by Kabul also. Okay. So remember I was telling you the little note. So I'm going to read to you what was on the little notes. So for the female, it would say, your doll could be named Mosuma, meaning gentle and non-aggressive. She is wearing the traditional garments of Hazari woman from the central highlands of Afghanistan. And then your doll could be named Awaz Ali, meaning replacement for Ali. He is wearing the traditional, rather drab garbs of a Hazari man from the central highlands. So the Hazari, and then, so you got, and this is one of the only sets I was able to get like this before I left. So you got mom and dad, and look at this guy, see, he's got no beard. You got daughter and son. So all Afghan men had beards. If it wasn't like the day-old beard, then it was like a full thing. Right? They had a variety of beards. If you could not grow a beard yet, whenever you see pictures or anything of do without a beard, more than likely he was still just like not hit puberty yet, and he doesn't have a beard. So, so that's it. But anyway, the Hazari are an ethnic group native to the mountainous regions of Hazarajat and central Afghanistan. They speak Hazara version of Pashtun, which is a derivative of a Persian language. That's how back, I mean, we've all heard of the Persians from biblical times. That's how far back these languages go. And it is one, so it is one of the, Dari is one of the official two languages of Afghanistan. So then they are the third largest ethnic group in Afghanistan, and they openly defied the Taliban, and so they were openly targeted by the Taliban. It was like, you know, it was hunting season of Hazari. honest, and that's the way a couple of the interpreters explained it to me. Hunting season on the Zara. And one of the things while I was out there, we were always sending support to new graves that were found of genocide sites. So these genocides were real. We just never heard of it because it was the Taliban, and they didn't tell nobody what they were doing. So many of these guys that seriously disliked the Taliban were very, very hardcore members of the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance was the organization that was a combination of several militias that eventually were able to defeat the Soviets, and with the U.S. assistance, eventually were able to defeat the Taliban. So obviously, yeah, they didn't want to work for the Taliban. They were totally against them. So this is President Karzai. Good resemblance. I mean, not bad. They were good. Okay. And President Karzai, he's a really interesting guy. Okay. And so they made me a doll of President Karzai because everybody should have one. And your president, Karzai, is wearing the president's signature garments. A carpool hat, right? That's what that's called. It would be lamb or sheep or goat, and a jelak robe from the north. So now, the robe signified a position of leadership, a position of honor, a position of prominence. Okay? And a shalwar kameez and waistcoat from the south. Hard to see here, but if anybody has seen pictures of him, or you can actually look at the doll. Literally underneath that, he's got like a suit, but in the Afghan style, right? So what he was doing there, because he was president of all of Afghanistan, he was representing the north and the south, the east and the west. In his dress, that's what his goal was. President Karzai is initially, or was from Kandahar, which was the last stronghold of the Taliban. And when we were able to take Kandahar, it became like, all right, hey, the war's over. You know, Karzai's got his home back, because under the warlord system, you take the guy's castle, the guy, he's done, right? So that was the idea. Although really, the south here is all desert. That's the really interesting thing about Afghanistan, is that you have the mountainous areas, so you got snow, you got cold weather, you got all four seasons. It's kind of like Denver, Colorado. But then when you start looking at the south, where you're getting close to Iran, you're getting close to Pakistan, and this is all desert. So he was actually a nomad from the desert area, which is Kandahar and Kandahar province. Initially, President Karzai was selected by all the politicians. You know the old, well, I don't want to do it, you do it. So all the politicians, when they were in Germany, because they couldn't be in Afghanistan yet, because the Taliban still hadn't been defeated, the Northern Alliance was working on doing that. All the politicians, they were in Germany, and they decided, well, you know, let's elect Karzai. He really should be the guy. All right, now, if you guys have paid any attention to Mexico, you know, they elect mayors, and about 3 days later, they kill the mayor.
Yep.
So that's kind of what was going on in Afghanistan, because the Americans, we would liberate a country, or we would liberate a city, a town, I'm sorry, the Northern Alliance, with coalition support, would liberate a town, and then of course, you know, we would, okay, you guys got it, we would move on, the Taliban would come back and then slaughter everybody for surrendering to the coalition. So that's what, you know, kind of like, yeah, let's let Karzai do it. So he was actually the president of the provisional government from 2001 to 2004. So in 2004, it was the first time we were able to have open and free elections in Afghanistan, and that was done right outside my base. That's why I pointed out, when I pointed out the German high school, that's where the elections actually took place for the entire city of Kabul. And President Karzai was there almost the whole day, and if need be, the plan was to egress him into my base, where then from there he would be medevaced with whatever, not medevaced, hopefully. That was a different contingency. But he would be flown out of Kabul to a safer place, because obviously the Taliban didn't want free elections. So in 2004, he got elected to his first term as president. They did 5-year terms. He re-elected in 2009, and he left political office in 2014. He still lives in Afghanistan, but he remains out of politics. He does, you know, he's letting the other guys now do it the best they can. Remember I said that he was from the Kandahar area, and that was the tribe that he was from, was the Durrani Tribal Confederation, which was several tribes. His particular tribe was the Popalzai. To this day, he is anti-Soviet. Remember I told you, they still call the Russians Soviets. They will never call them anything else. He is anti-Soviet and very, very anti-Taliban, although he understands that for peace purposes, they may have to start talking with the Taliban. The Kuchis. They're a tribe. Now this young man the card reads, your doll could be named Kand Aga, meaning a sweet person. He is the first ex-combatant who joined the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration program in Kunduz province. That's where the Kuchi reside. He chose demining as his reintegration option. So that whole thing was all about, you know, stop being in little militias, join the Afghan army, and do something productive for your country. And this young man decided he was going to do demining. That's the one that's back there with the mine in front of it. It's not a real. By the way, all the mines in here, none of them are real. They're all fake. And then obviously his spouse, your doll could be named Rana, meaning the brightness. She is wearing the traditional Kuchi girl dress, Afghanistan's nomadic pastoralists who follow their flocks and seasons. So the Kuchi are between the Hindu Kush, which is here, through Kabul, and then back up this way. This is where you would find the majority of the Kuchi, from Kunduz to Gardas. And there are several tribes that claim to be part of Kuchi, and what they do is they follow their flocks. And so they don't actually, they're very mobile. They don't actually stay, they come down from the mountains in the winter, because it gets very hard to live there. And then they go back up into the mountains in order to be able to feed their flocks in the spring and summer. Now, the one thing about the Kuchis is that early in the war, and at the time we were trying to figure out, you know, everybody's got an agenda, so Afghans are the same way. So they were saying that the Kuchis, over 50% of the Taliban were actually Kuchi. There was no real evidence to show that. However, that was the prominent belief was that if you were Kuchi and you're with the Taliban. Was a problem, especially when we were trying to bring them back into the government. The Panjshir Valley. Now, the Panjshir Valley is a very small part. Okay, here we go. It's a very small part of Afghanistan, but it's the only part of Afghanistan that was never conquered by the Brits, it was never conquered by the Soviets, and it was never conquered by the Taliban. And so they have a great sense of pride in that. And it's just so rugged that if you're a smart army, you're just going to work around them. Okay, because if you send an army in there, it's not going to work out well for it. And you know, the Russians had all kinds of air support. They don't work out well for several reasons. We won't talk about the Stingers. But the Brits, you know, they were on foot, and they were heavy infantry, really, is what they were. And then, of course, the Taliban just gave up on the Panjshir Valley. Now, part of the reason, okay, so your doll could be named Ato Ullah, meaning a reward from God. He is wearing the pakal and the scarf made famous by the warriors of the Panjshir Valley in northeast Afghanistan. And this is his wife. Your doll could be named Kandi Gul, meaning the sweetness of a rose. And they got very, very nice names. She is wearing the traditional garments of a woman of the Panjshir Valley with a burqa. Pretty lady. Just really nobody would know that. And could be visiting Kabul, because especially if they ever left the Panjshir Valley, Then they like doubled up on burqas, all right? I mean, they were not to be seen by anybody besides their husbands, or if they were still underage, their family. Okay, so, and then as far as with the Panjshir province, Bazaar is the provincial capital, and remember that name, because, now, did you guys notice this man? Right? Looks a lot like this man, but they would never tell you that that's who it's supposed to be. Because this man, his name is Ahmad Shah Massoud. To the Afghans, he was the closest thing to living God there ever could be. He was called the Lion of Panjshir. He commanded the Northern Alliance, which was basically, you saw that little tiny area that he was from. Well, Northern Alliance was almost the whole north of Afghanistan, and he commanded that entire army, which was made up of all different warlords. Okay, but they called him the Lion of Panjshir because he had never been conquered, whereas the rest of Afghanistan had. And so so there was a little bit of time of peace between when the Soviets left and the Taliban came on in. And during that time, they were trying to reform the Afghan government. They were trying to bring back the monarchy, etc. He was named the commander of all forces within Afghanistan for that time. So when the Taliban came in, he became, like, obviously #1 arch enemy to the Taliban. And by the time we got involved with Afghanistan, well, I can't say it that way, but by the early 2000, the Taliban controlled almost all of Afghanistan. If they didn't control it, they didn't want to control it. Okay, but it was Taliban, it was Sharia law. So the only part they didn't control, one of the only parts, was his part of Afghanistan. And in that little space, he literally had an entire army just like waiting for their opportunity to fight back at the Taliban. And so obviously that day came, but before that day came, September 9th, he was assassinated, September 9th of 2001. He would never grant interviews, and then one day he decided, yeah, you know what, everything seems right, okay, they can come, the guy can come here to my base, and so he granted the interview. That day, they had an improvised explosive device within the camera, obviously killed the guy holding the camera, but that life out there, you did what you had to do, and most of the times you did it, because if you didn't do it, then they were going to kill your whole family. So you do what you got to do. So he killed Massoud, he killed himself, and several other individuals that were in the area. That was September 9th, 2001, and on September 11th, we had what happened to the States. Right? We had our 9/11. The whole time, when he was fighting with the Soviets, and when he was fighting the Taliban, he was working with American intelligence. So when they would receive our Stinger missiles to shoot down Russian planes, they were receiving them through the Lion of Panjshir. So we always knew, the Americans, the coalition always knew that the day we invaded Afghanistan, he was our go-to guy. So to preempt him being able to be our go-to guy, the Taliban took him out first and then orchestrated 9/11. So that's where his tie. And when Karzai became president the first time, he made him a national hero, in those countries, Asia and stuff. A national hero is godlike status, and that's why I said they will never tell you that is a doll of Massoud, but it is. And you can't go too far in the city of Kabul without there being a shrine, a portrait, a center called Massoud. Everything out there is all about this man, and rightfully so. I mean, he literally kept the idea of freedom alive in Afghanistan for almost 30 years. There's also Masood Day, which is September 9th, and he has been given the title by Islam as our martyred commander. All right, Pashtun. So the Pashtun, your doll could be named Esmarai, meaning a lion. He is wearing the traditional festive garb of the Pashtun people. And as far as the young lady, your doll could be named Soraya, meaning a gem or jewel. She is wearing the traditional festive garb of the Pashtun people. The Pashtun are Pashtun-speaking people residing primarily in what lies between the Hindu Kush. Hindu Kush is here, and this is the Central Highlands, and the Central Highlands, and between Afghanistan and Pakistan. For years, the Pashtun, when you spoke of the Pashtun, it was Afghans. For years, a Pashtun was synonymous with an Afghan. There were no other tribes that were considered to be Afghans. It was only the Pashtun. Until Afghanistan started expanding due to different, throughout the year, centuries, wars and stuff. The Pashtun consider themselves descended from Afghana, who is the grandson of King Saul of Israel. And so they believe that they are the 10th tribe of Israel, the lost tribe of Israel. Okay? Some scholars believe that. Other scholars say, well, maybe not, because they only find that in like biblical text, right? So, but they can't find anything actually historical text. Some Pashtun claim that they're descendants of Sayyids, which are Muhammad's people, and some believe that they are descendants of Peshawar and Kandahar because they believe that they're descendants of Alexander the Great. And now I don't have too many pictures of actual Afghans up there, but in the southern regions, they are blue-eyed and blonde hair. You figure it out. Uzbek. So the Uzbeks are primarily, there is a country called Uzbekistan, and obviously that's where the most Uzbeks live. But the second most Uzbeks live in Afghanistan. They are the largest majority, they are the largest minority in Afghanistan. So this is the northern border of Afghanistan, and that's primarily Uzbek. Now the Uzbek, can't see his outfit too well, but the doll is there if you want to look at it. He's wearing one of those robes like Karzai was wearing, right? And that's because his name, so your doll could be named Chapandas, meaning the one who plays Buzkashi. He's wearing the traditional warm chapan and longi after playing Buzkashi, Afghanistan's national game. He is the Uzbek tribe of the northern Afghanistan. His Uzbek clothing include the chapan, the kaftan. There's also the headgear, which is Tibet tika for men, and the paranja veil for women. You see it over her shoulder or over her arms. They don't really wear burqas, but they do have the veil. Okay. The other thing about the Uzbek men, they usually carry personally crafted knives. It's another status thing. They create their own knives, and then they'll give them as gifts to each other, etc. And they are of Turkish descent, and one that besides being the largest minority group in Afghanistan, they're also the largest minority group outside of Uzbekistan in any other country also. So there's a lot of them. They sincerely dislike the Soviets, and they sincerely dislike the Taliban. Now, the Chapandas, which is the Buzkashi players, these guys are like superstars in Afghanistan, and in any country that plays that sport. There's several, and it's to the point where if you are one of the best, you can pick and choose whosever horse you want to ride. Some dude's riding down the street with his horse. I want to ride that horse. You can't have it, but you can use it in the game. I mean, and it's an honor to the dude to let you use his horse. That's how prominent these players are in Afghanistan. And that is one of the theories of why the Taliban did not want that game played anymore, is because you're not supposed to have any idols, right? You're not supposed to have any heroes, so under Sharia law. The Afghan soldier and his wife. Ultimately, this is what one Afghanistan, one army was all about. It was about being able to unify Afghanistan under a republic. It's an Islamic republic, but it's not like Iran. In Iran, you don't elect your. In Iran, it's a republic where you don't really elect your leaders. Whereas in Afghanistan, we were able to, while I was still there, we were able to hold elections down to the local level. And that was a big undertaking, because you had to get ballots out to the mountains, etc., and so on. So the idea is that a free government elected by free people of Afghanistan, who has an army that all of Afghanistan can support instead of a bunch of different warlords, and then of course his bride, the homemaker. I don't know if you can see. I kind of cut it out, but I kind of wish I had it. With this group, and I'm not sure, but they also included, maybe they get to be during Christmas ornaments that we still put on our tree, right? So there were little hearts and moon, half crescent moon. So that was kind of neat. But the Kabul Dolls really became a well-publicized venture. This was an Air Force nurse who was serving in Afghanistan, and she was up north. She was actually in Bagram, and they were actually receiving dolls. Now she was there in, I believe it was 2007. So she was there about 2 years after I left, and the dolls were actually being sold all the way up to Bagram at that point. So it was working. What they were doing was working, and she actually wrote about it in her book, which is it's called Messages from Afghanistan. Her name was Nancy LaChapelle, and she was a 51-year-old Air Force nurse when she was deployed to Afghanistan. Her book really is about, it's trying to immerse herself within the culture, and it lends really heavy on her correspondence that she had with people back home. So it's actually kind of a neat book. But in that book, she specifically talks about how there's a couple of organizations that have been created to help the war widows and their wives by offering them employment, and how Kabul Dolls was one of those. That was kind of neat to see that in a book. Then there was also another lady who was living in Washington, D.C., who had gotten a couple that soldiers had brought back for her. Soldiers, airmen, I'm not sure what they were. And what she did was she was able to get in touch with one of the interpreters that was still working in Kabul, and she would be sent dolls, and she would sell them in the D.C. area and then send the money back to the widows. So it literally became an international operation, I guess, for a while, you know. So, and then of course, to show their appreciation, yes, yeah, I wanted to surprise you guys, so I didn't put that one out. To show their appreciation, they did do, one of my buddies said, I believe it was your brother, it looks, I think it was Richard, it looks like a voodoo doll. And when they first gave it to me, I was kind of like, I looked at the interpreter, and I said, that's the only one they made, right? Just to make sure. I don't want too many of those floating around. But what I found amazing was that if you look, there's little razors. It's hard to see in the picture, but you can see it if you look at the doll. They even got my razor stubble. So it's a pretty good looking doll, I gotta say. Probably my favorite. All right, now, of course, unfortunately, all good things come to sometimes a bad end. And in the Middle East, and in the East Asia, that seems to be how things work out sometimes. So these are what the current Kabul dolls look like. So unfortunately, right about 2008, the situation in Afghanistan, in Kabul especially, started becoming tenuous again, right? So Once again, it started getting violent. We hear about the bombings all the time, hear about the suicides and suicide bombers. So because of that, these women that were doing this were being threatened. You stay in your home, or you're not going to make it home, or we're going to blow up where you guys are making the dolls. So in 2010, unfortunately, the company closed down, and this company's still also in Afghanistan, but you see the difference between the dolls that I got and the dolls that are being marketed now. They're called Kabul Dolls, and it's obviously I'm sure male-dominated company, which is mass marketed, because I'm sure they don't have widows working there trying to really taking pride in what they're doing, and this is what Kabul Dolls looks like today. So, oh, yeah, and this is a map of Kabul. This was really an overview of so you could get an idea of where we were. So in the morning, I could look out and see the snow-topped mountains right there in Afghanistan. It really was not a far drive. This is where my compound was. This is where Masood Circle was, the King's Palace, the Italian food, and church. Yeah, there was church there too. Primarily the food, and then obviously if we wanted to, we did some what I would call touring around, and we were able to really get a good feel for the historical aspect of Afghanistan. I mean, you're talking about a place that is like tens of thousands of years old. There have been people living there. So, and then this is my book. It is official. I did get an email this week, I didn't tell you, that says that my book will be published on July 8th. I might be able to get you guys an autographed copy. So, that concludes my presentation. I hope I didn't bore you too much. Throw tomatoes, just close this door, and shoot me down the window. Yeah.
Lorenzo, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Congratulations for all the great work you did. It's, sad that these things often don't.
Yeah, that was a shame of it.
Yeah, but it was amazing the work you did. The dolls are absolutely incredible. All the, take some time to look at what Lorenzo had set up over the course of the last 3 days. It's really fascinating. The trucks are riveting, the dolls are beautiful. And the history of Afghanistan, I wasn't aware of any of this.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming out. There's refreshments out there. I'll have water out there in a second. Please sign in if you haven't already. Feel free to donate to the extent you're capable of donating. And we'll see you at the next presentation.
Thank you.